Actually, she's back with another banger. The doc is in the house. Ladies and gentlemen, another Professor Kimya's class is going to start right now. This time we're dealing with an interesting concept, Thomas Sowell. Now, look, I have not been a fan, not a fan, not a fan, not a fan, but I'm learning that you don't have to love everything about somebody to really learn the great things that that person has to offer. So let's see if I'm wrong. Let's see if I can grow. Five things that Thomas Sowell has taught us. Dr. Dennis, it's in your hands.
All right. So thank you so much for having me again. And I want us to address what it means as Black people to integrate our ideas. What does it mean to focus a lot on each other and developing more of our own concepts, theories, research, and actions and evaluations of the actions, and making sure that we're integrating different components of various Black contributors who've done a lot for our work. Even when we do not agree with everything that they've done, we're finding what they have done.
All right, so before we get started, do you agree with 50%, 75%, 25%? Just trying to read the room, trying to read the room.
I don't even think of it in terms of percentage wise because I will say this much, and I'll talk about that a little bit later too. Thomas Sowell has written many books and many articles. Most people will not read even two of them. Even people who appreciate Thomas Sowell don't read all of his publications. And so he's 94 years old now. So think about what it means to be doing more than 50 years of work. So I just appreciate our people who are invested in doing work. He's not a scammer. He's not a liar. He's an exaggerator, which is one of the that's and our people have to understand both sides of exaggerations. One side of the exaggeration is when people say that we are so oppressed that we're only oppressed, right? Everything's oppression, there's no solutions.
Mm.
And usually part of that side of exaggerators includes people who claim that we created everything around the world, people who claim that we're indigenous to Western Hemisphere, all types of stuff. Because the idea is to find anything to respond to when we identify as an oppressed people. The opposite side of the extreme is unfortunately what Dr. Thomas Sowell sometimes aligns with, and that is the down.
Trump,
I don't.
Trump.
No, I don't. I don't care about. I don't care about Donald Trump. I don't want. I don't want non-blacks to be the center of our conversations. My focus is on our people, so that's what I'm focusing on. So
Ashe, Ashe.
So the other side of the extreme is Thomas Sowell, where a lot of times he would appear, maybe unintentionally and sometimes very intentionally, in downplaying some of the problems. He previously had downplayed the role of transatlantic slavery, of course, acknowledging transatlantic slavery, which is why he's on Western Hemisphere, while also addressing enslavement exists for all people and all of that kind of stuff. And there are
Oh,
and there are other instances where that has happened. However, I really want our people to understand that if you listen to a lot of our people, like if you're someone like you and me who goes into different spaces, interacts with different people, locally and nationally and even globally, you'll find that many of our people have some viewpoints that once it's expressed, you're actually kind of shocked. And that includes people who get more conservative as they get older. And so I really want our people to stop pretending that all of our people, or even most of our people, have one particular perspective, because that's a
okay.
false depiction.
Yeah, I think that Nelly and Snoop taught us that this week.
I don't I don't care. I don't care about them either. Look here, black folks, I'm gonna tell y'all something as Africans. Y'all are gonna have so many distractions. Y'all are gonna have so many distractions. I don't care about any of those people. They have nothing to do with black solutions, black conclusions, black revolution, and black evolution, which is beyond the revolution. I don't care about any of those people. I'm not thinking about them. I'm not going to talk about them. Most people are not going to boycott them, no matter what people say on social media and on these waste of cable news networks. So, black folks, instead of running your mouth about nonsense and unimportant things, I really encourage our people to focus on real solutions and real productivity. All that other stuff, like I post about on social media, these issues are not limited to one president. They're not limited to one political party. They're not limited to one inauguration. So, for the black folks who have thought that everything was cool until this inauguration, this president, then you have missed out on centuries of problems that every president has done.
Every president.
Every president that you thought has done something, you have to understand every politician compromises. Every politician. They put in the good stuff and they sacrifice bad things that you know nothing about because that's not what they advertise for their campaign. They don't put the bad stuff on the White House website as legislation signed. You don't know about Barack Obama and Biden and all of them when they talk about having to negotiate the 1033 program and all these forms of militarization funding around the world, including among African nations fighting wars against each other that are funded through European governments, including Canada, United States of America. All people hear about is the good stuff. So I don't want our people, first of all, I don't want our people to really join these political parties. But if you insist on joining political parties, understand that being an informed voter requires understanding the pros and cons of all of them across the board, across the aisle, understanding that the good things that are done always are a compromise. There's no such thing since the origins of humans that there are decision makers, including politicians, who have made good decisions without promising to negotiate the bad stuff. I want our people to get into the adulthood mindset and stop playing this childish game that these news outlets and social media want you to play.
Well, I definitely want to highlight the good brother Emmanuel. He always comes with the fire. Salute, Emmanuel.
Hey,
Exactly. It's not
brother.
like he said.
Hey.
Exactly. It's not like Snoop or any of them ever claimed to be revolutionaries. They're just rappers, and they tell you all the time they about the money. Yeah. And hey, Beverly, keep listening, Beverly. Keep Beverly. Keep listening, Beverly. All right. So Doc, I got in the way.
No,
I'm
you
going to get
didn't.
out the way.
You didn't get in the way. No, no, no. I mean, I appreciate you because, by the way, remember the DJ holiday, the DJ celebration. So shout out to all the
Yeah.
DJs this week. So I do want to say that one of my favorite MCs, Steele, General Steele, from my favorite hip hop duo, Smith and Wesson, he actually said something on social.
Wait. You went Smith and Wesson? Okay.
Smith and
Okay.
Wesson is my number
Okay.
one. Yeah, so Black Moon is my favorite hip hop group. Smith and Wesson is my favorite duo. My second favorite duo is Camp Lo, by the way. So anyone who follows me,
Okay,
anyone who
baby,
follows
come
me on
on. Baby,
anyone who
come
follows
on.
me on social media or hears me do lectures and stuff will hear me blend in some don't front, I got you open, some Smith and Wesson, all that stuff. But General Steele, he actually did a walk and talk video that I shared yesterday on social media where he was saying being in hip hop, being an MC, does not mean that you are going to become independently wealthy. For some people, it ends up that way. But you got to understand the difference between your art and people assuming that you're going to start making money. So that's why a lot of times for artists, we want people to understand the difference between expressing your art versus making a whole lot of money. And also just remember that I just, I sincerely want our people to understand the history of our culture, the history of our artists. And artists are musicians, they're drawings, all types of art. People have different socio-political views. Also, if you talk about collaborations, collaborations will be across the aisle. You cannot tell your favorite politician that they have to collaborate across the aisle if you yourself don't want to do that as well. So it all goes together, and that's a difficult battle, but that's something that I want our people to understand.
Yo,
So,
that's a conversation you're gonna have to. That's another class, Doc. That's another
well,
class. That's another class. All right, I want to get us back on schedule. All
oh,
right,
well, it's your fault. It's your fault.
it ain't my fault.
Did I do that? Okay. All right. All right. So now I'm back. Dr. Thomas Sowell, economist. So, although Thomas Sowell is an economist and he's still alive, he does very much historical writings. And he also addresses the role of cultures when addressing the history and the economic outcomes. And so, if you ever read his work, you will see here on the next slide, this is my shared Google Drive folder with Thomas Sowell's work. And some of
And
it, uh huh.
I'll say, and Code Keepers, we're going to make this link available in the show notes after the show. So if you can't link on it right now because it's on this video screen, we'll have that available for you. Give me by tomorrow. Okay, let's go.
So this is the shared Google Drive file folder rather, and it has some of the writings. It has some of the writings from Thomas Sowell. It does not have even a portion or a segment of the book. So I think I might have maybe two of the PDFs of his books that I was allowed to upload. I also have some of my information in that folder, which includes my explanation of human capital, social capital, cultural capital, and also one of the articles in this folder is my father, Rutledge Melvin Dennis, who's a sociologist who actually wrote many, many, many years ago a review of Thomas Sowell. So that's also in that folder. And I hear noise in the background. Is that normal?
Yeah, that was dope. I like that. I like that. I like that. Salute Team Riverside. I just had to drop that. You know, you dropped the bomb. Your father wrote many books. He has a critique on Thomas Sowell. So,
Yes. But the difference is that Thomas Sowell's 94. He's still alive. My father's 85, still alive, still very active in doing work, including publications. He and I do writings together. My father appreciates Thomas Sowell. He has many of Thomas Sowell's books. He addresses the critiques of Sowell while addressing the contributions of Sowell. And so I will admit that years ago, I was like, man, this Sowell guy, what's up with him? But when I started just reading more and more, listening to more presentations, understanding the purpose of varying Black perspectives, varying African perspectives, this is where I don't give up on our people. Like I said earlier, we have to integrate different concepts, different theories, different research, different actions. It doesn't mean you agree with everything. So I teach theory courses, and theory courses means teaching my student scholars how to do integration. Integration means you critique something and you say, what am I going to add to this? In other words, we never get rid of concepts. We never get rid of theories. We don't throw them away. They exist for the remainder of human existence. The difference is we critique them and then we say, how can I make this better? So I want our people to think about this when it comes to Thomas Sowell. And here's why this is very important. As Africans, as Black people, we tend to give up on each other very easily, very quickly. When we don't agree with even one word or one sentence that someone says or someone wrote, we will throw away the book, we will throw away the entire person's existence. Meanwhile, there are non-Blacks for centuries who have been anti-Black, They've ignored us, but they've done a good theory, and black folks are dedicated to them. I always use Karl Marx and Frederick Engels as an example. Karl Marx is also a sociologist. Black folks are very dedicated to Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. They see that as a form of radicalism and all that good stuff. And I'm like, well, Karl Marx only focused on Western Europe. He did not think that Africans were capable of an uprising. He did not think indigenous people, the Western Hemisphere, were capable. He did not think that Asians were capable. He thought Western Europe. He then eventually accepted Eastern Europe because of what was happening over on that side regarding communism. But that's an example, though. If you're going to be so excited about a non black person's approach, and the non black person did not even care about our people, then I really encourage our people to care about black people whose approaches are very different than what you expected. You disagree with some components of their approach, but you're like, I can pick parts of this and integrate it. The difference, though, is I tell our people, stay away from scammers, con artists, and liars. It's one thing to disagree with somebody, but when they're a scammer and a liar outright, then that's a deal breaker. So it's okay to have deal breakers, but deal breakers are not just because you disagree on everything. Okay?
I got a question then. So he was a former black radical, became a conservative. Can you be a black radical and a conservative at the same time, in your opinion?
Yeah, yes, because that's actually when you look at the origins of black radicalism. You can look at even the forms of Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington. These are very conservative individuals who took a very conservative approach. And you want to understand the meanings of conservatism. There could be moral conservatism, people who want traditional values, traditional standards and actions. And it could be financial conservatism, which can be people who just believe that the government should not intervene. And so a lot of times people in European nations, in USA and Canada, they feel like if you're conservative, then that means you have to be Republican and all that stuff. That's because they've really conformed to these very narrow categories. And I tell people, you actually can think outside those categories. Nobody's
Right.
telling you how to think. Well, I mean, there are people telling them, like politicians are telling you how to think, political parties are telling you how to think. You know, there are schools that are telling you how to think, social media, MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, they're all telling you how to think. But if you want to be intellectual, right? You want to be intellectual, you want to be an active, conscious taxpayer, an active, conscious voter, you have to say, look, I can have these viewpoints and not join any political party.
Right.
Or you can have these viewpoints and join a political party that differ from the views of many people in that political party. That's why I just want our people to have that wise formation there. So again, Thomas Sowell was a former black radical who became a conservative. Now, he did not become a conservative in the same way that Eldridge Cleaver did. So if anyone's familiar with Eldridge Cleaver, he became a conservative Republican after he had traveled abroad and he saw that communism was actually quite anti-black and it was quite government control, contrary to what people were reading about and preaching about. It was something that he was like, oh no. So unfortunately, Eldridge Cleaver took his black radicalism to become a conservative Republican, and he took a different twist altogether in other ways, which is why for my courses, I don't use Eldridge Cleaver's book, which I do have the book. I use Kathleen Cleaver and her writings instead. And of course, Kathleen Cleaver is an attorney.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So former black radical, he became a conservative. He does not align with any political party. So you'll see that during these presidential elections, you will oftentimes see him writing advice to a political party. Like usually it's writing advice to the Republican Party. So people are often shocked when they see Thomas Sowell writing advice to the Republican Party. But you have to understand the Democratic Party is not going to be receptive to any advice that does not just depict people as oppressed and victims. I mean, the Democratic Party is not seen as like solutions based, really. in terms of black people especially, they see themselves as the saviors, right? So that's another issue. So someone like Thomas Sowell would not waste time pretending that the Democratic Party will take really good feedback and make changes. So Thomas Sowell takes it a lot of times in writings to the Republican Party. What
Is
needs to
that
be
your
changed?
position, or is that something that he stated?
Well, that's something that's an unequivocal statement, regardless of that's why Thomas Sowell sends information to the Republican Party. I mean, no, seriously, that's why. Like any political party that wants to make economic changes and attract a certain audience will be receptive to advice, right?
I'm just
Demo-
saying. I'm just wondering if it's something he stated, or is that your opinion on the situation?
it's a combination of both. I mean, that's one of the
Okay.
common critiques of the Democratic Party in particular. Republican Party has its own problems, but the Democratic Party's problem is that they assume that they have everybody on their side. This is why I tell people don't tell anyone to vote blue no matter who, right? Because I tell people you better vote across the aisle. Don't just vote for one political party in that platform.
Okay.
But you can't give advice to any group that thinks that they've already got the black vote, right?
Now, I like the fact that he's involved with a think tank. I think we should create a think tank. We may set up
Well,
the Professor Kimya think tank.
no, I cannot stand think tanks. I'm gonna be honest. I can't stand think tanks.
Oh,
So yeah. So sorry, I'm leaving you by yourself in that one. Think tanks are they share a lot of knowledge, but I tell people I actually do actions as well. Like I do community work. So it's wonderful to think, it's wonderful to talk, it's wonderful to have meetings and writings, but my writings are designed to actually reach people and to actually be involved in the actions. So think tank
okay.
will just not be my setting. Hit me up when I'm like 80 years old and I might rethink it, okay?
All right.
By the
Cool beans.
time, give me 40 years and I might be ready to just think about it, okay?
Cool beans.
Yeah, all right. So yeah, so that's one critique of Thomas Sowell is that now he's a writer for Hoover Institution, and that's Stanford University think tank, and they look at different policies, issues of economics, and so forth. So when you go to their website, it's Dr. Thomas Sowell on there, and it shows the overall explanation of what the think tank does. So a lot of his research, recent publications are through the think tank. So he has not been as involved as he has previously because, of course, he's now doing it through the think tank. All right. So here's something that our people can grasp from Thomas Sowell, though, because Thomas Sowell is similar to other black intellectuals, black scholars. He actually critiqued desegregation. He critiqued racial desegregation. I'm a I'm about to fight you for these sounds. I'm about to fight these sounds. And at least give me like a helter skelter, le flow, le fly background.
All right. All right.
Yes,
We'll
yes,
do that.
y'all. Helter
All right.
skelter be the fly, y'all. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So he had a critique of desegregation. And this is where he's similar to other scholars, including people like Harold Cruz. Even Derek Bell critiqued desegregation and components of affirmative action as well. Thomas Sowell also have writings that critique affirmative action, which you can find in that folder on my shared Google Drive as well. So here's the thing, because in that shared Google Drive, you'll also see where he critiques things like the government helping with medical insurance. So when you read Thomas Sowell's writings, I want you to really think outside of your assumptions. Like, don't go into any publication for anyone and automatically disagree before you actually read it. Open your mind up. Be ready to read something and not just say, I hate this person, I disagree with this person, because you haven't even read it yet, right? So the same thing applies to when you read about Thomas Sowell's critiques of the healthcare industry and medical insurance. Because again, if people talk about not wanting to have too much government control, You got to understand what it means when the US form of capitalism has been integrated with components of European socialism for more than a century. Because again, USA, Europe, and Canada, and when I say Europe, these are European nations that are not communist, integrate components of capitalism, but USA is still the most capitalist of the nations that integrated components of European socialism. But think about it though. If you want more government intervention when it comes to things like health insurance, then you have to understand what it means that government intervention is literally government control, government mandates. So those are some things that you'll read about in the Thomas Sowell folder. And that includes when he assessed affirmative action. Affirmative action, you can disagree with his assessment there, but just think about it in the component of, do we really need government intervention? Because as you notice, and Derek Bell addressed this as well in some sense, when the government intervenes, it means that these things are forced into policies, forced into laws and actions. And by the way, white women, and particularly white people with disabilities, but white women in particular, have been the biggest recipients of affirmative action since the 1980s. So that's an example that something can sound so important because we talk about how it opened the door for black people in particular, because affirmative action, just like when we talk about hate crime legislation, it was presented for black people, African Americans specifically. But as with almost everything that we present for our people, there's a trickle down effect, of course, that impacts everyone in a good way, oftentimes. And oftentimes, that trickle down effect that impacts everyone else sometimes surpasses the impact that it's supposed to have on our people. So that's one of the critiques of hate crime legislation and affirmative action. So then the question is, we have this affirmative action, but changes are not really happening like we assumed they would happen. All right, I'm about to have you turn all of this off, okay?
Yo, this is Black Moon.
I know, but you gotta turn it all off. I need our people to concentrate on what I'm saying right now.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Doc. Go ahead, Doc.
And you know, Black Moon is my favorite group. Buckshot. You know, and by the way, Buckshot was beaten over his property that he owns, but thankfully he's recovering. But
Okay. All right. So,
okay,
what was his minimization of black problems?
okay.
I want
Well,
to jump down.
no,
That part
no,
just
no.
captured me.
We can't jump down yet. Okay, hold on
All
a
right.
second.
Well, you're the
Okay,
professor. I'm the student. All right. Go
okay.
ahead.
Since you up to interrupting with music and stuff. Okay. So again, when you into the shared Google Drive folder that I have up there, you'll find the Dunbar High School example that Thomas Sowell used. And when Thomas Sowell addressed Dunbar High School, he looked at that as a wonderful example of black blacks being segregated and therefore having to form our own resources. Now, that does not mean that Thomas Sowell was a black nationalist back then when he wrote this piece, but instead, it's an example that you can look at when you talk about Septima Clark, Harold Cruz, Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, and other people, including people like myself. What does it mean when we have to create our own? What does it mean when we have to self develop as individuals and as black collectives? Because it's not going to be done for us and delivered to us, and we're not going to be able to go into these other spaces to get it. And we can think of many examples, like when we speak of our black elders who are now in their 70s, 80s, 90s, 100, they'll tell you that if they come from a black community, like they always saw black people, they know what it felt like to be
Mm-hmm.
segregated. And a lot of times they didn't see anything wrong with it as long as nobody was messing with them, as long as they were able to grow their own food or have their own stores, have their own bank, even have their own schools. The idea was that they're developing their own economic plan, their own school materials, teaching each other, reaching each other, helping each other, and not looking for a savior outsider to do that for them. So this is one thing that Thomas Sowell addresses here. That's one of the problems of desegregation. When you say, okay, you all can come into these white schools, you all can get on these school buses. We're going to send the school bus to that predominantly black part of the city and bring you over here. It's with the assumption that now you're going to get a better education. However, with a better education, it changes components of our culture. And it also reduces the tendency of meeting the needs for black children and black adults. Because again, it's no longer that center focus on our people. Now you're in this space. And you'll see that in various schools, including my brothers and I are products of predominantly black Richmond Public Schools, K through 12. And what does it mean when you all of a sudden say, we're not just going to address our culture, our learning process. You're now going to be in this space with everybody else. So that's an example there. So this is where Thomas Sowell also took a global approach. So you'll notice that most of his writings regarding economic development and cultural development are a global economic approach. So it's looking about around the world. And when he talks about cultures, he's comparing cultures. He's talking about various racial and ethnic groups, which I'll talk about later. So
Okay.
this is what Brother Varner wants to address, the minimizing black problems. So as I mentioned earlier, Thomas Sowell is critiqued because, like I said earlier, one side of the extreme is exaggerating black problems such that we are 100% oppressed. That's our identity. We have nothing. We didn't come from thousands of years of knowledge, inventions, cultures. We're just oppressed. Okay? That's one side of the extreme. The other side is people similar to Sowell, perhaps, who say that the oppression is not as much as we claim it is. That the issue of transatlantic slavery is actually quite prevalent, and the list goes on. So you could read more about this in my writings on the shared Google Drive. So that's one critique of Sowell, though, because we cannot minimize the role of transatlantic slavery. We cannot minimize the impact, the lasting impact of transatlantic slavery. We cannot tell black people that there are no problems. However, what we can do is make sure our people understand that the problems exist or persist for our people, but for humans in general, problems exist and persist. So therefore, we need to talk about what does it mean to develop our own resources. Because as a people, we cannot identify as oppressed. Like that's one thing I always explain when I do presentations and everything else. We're not an oppressed people. There are oppressions, but this is not a constant, nonstop process. And you can learn about this when you learn about the work of Marcus Garvey and all these other people who have done work regarding race for centuries. When I,
Now, interestingly enough, Darius is tapped in, and he says most black problems come from black people.
that's yeah, I mean, so that's actually one of the critiques. So if you watch my video that I did 2 weeks ago with Septima Clark did honestly address that. She was honest. She said she said black leaders need to address the problems of white people harming us, white people excluding us from these outlets. However, the focus needs to be on what our people are doing to each other. So that's an example what Harold Cruz addresses regarding the inner world, which is
You know,
why,
I really agree with that, but I also understand that if you look at groups in in seclusion, their problems, American problems, come from Americans. All right. If you look at church problems in the church, they come from church folk, people who attend church. If you look at the problems that we experience in hip hop, those come from hip hoppers. That's just natural. That's how things are. When the so I don't I understand why people would get upset with Dr. Soul. Is he a doctor?
yes,
Okay, why they
he's a
would get
PhD
upset with Dr.
economist.
Soul, and why Darius might think that his statement that most black problems come from black people is astute or a big deal. It seems to me like it's the normal course of life.
So here's the thing. So, of course, I'm a criminologist as well with a criminal justice background. So, when we talk about crime, victimization, and offending, most crimes are done by people who know each other, people who are family members, or they're some in the same settings. So, most people are in very racial isolated settings. Therefore, white people are most likely to abuse white people. Black
Hmm.
people most likely to abuse black people. Asians most likely to abuse Asians, especially of particular ethnicities and nations of origins and languages. And so that's a fact regarding crime and victimization and offending. So if you're looking at it in terms of abuse, in terms of decision makers, like we can talk about the role of medical and health professionals. It's very common for our people to say they want a black doctor, a black dentist, a black gynecologist. Like black men who we encourage to get the prostate checked, we say, there might be a black man doctor who does prostate checks. However, one thing we always have to understand is that a lot of our people, though, are so invested in trying to save their career and will risk us to save their career. So that's another example of how we can address the harms that we do to each other. Because
Yeah,
you'll notice sometimes that our people are not as tolerant of each other as they are of everyone else. Like they're fighting everyone else's problems. They're fighting causes for everyone else's issues who are not black. And you'll
I
just
just
notice.
saw that today.
Uh huh.
Man, it blew me away.
Right.
Mike or Michael Moriat, I can't think, the brother from the Urban League, the guy
Uh
who
huh.
was the president of the national president of the Urban League. They had him on the TV and he was talking about, well, this group and we got to fight for this group and we got to fight for this group because we're all interconnected. And I was like, dude,
Well, I mean, here's the thing. So one thing, remember, blackness includes all types of identities within blackness. Like we talk about as
right?
Africans. Africans are thousands of years of different genders, different sexualities, different body types, different disabilities, different spiritualities, different religions, different everything, right? And Africans have also been trailblazers for thousands of years of human justice, human rights. So, as black people, racially, we're the trailblazers of racial justice for various people who are not just us. Like when we look at the founding of the NAACP with co founders Ida B. Wells and W.B. Du Bois, eventually the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People included people who are not black who also needed to be helped. And also, when Du Bois wrote his Brownies book, which I also have that on my shared Google Drive, when he wrote that book, it was always only for black children. And then eventually, he included non black children, just based on this premise, though, that you understand the central focus is on people, but that we are just very generous to include other people. You can look at the Black Panther Party, and I'm talking about the original Black Panther Party that did not get lost in all the other stuff to waste time, but I'm talking about the original form that had the soup kitchens, that had the clothing giveaways, that had the discussion groups where they actually would debate to form knowledge beyond just this cult following of having one belief system. The Black Panther Party used to actually have medical trucks on the corners of streets. They would have medical professionals, including nurses, testing for blood and all that stuff. The Black Panther Party did their services, including the soup kitchens, for people who are not black. The whole idea was poor and working class. Because if you're looking at a socioeconomic emphasis there, the idea would be to include everyone who's struggling, and that includes our people. So that's just something to think about there. The emphasis on class includes our people, but it's not limited to us.
Understood. Understood. All right, let's go back.
All right. So like I said, the minimization of black problems is a critique of soul. And this is just where I just make sure our people understand we have to have a balance. We can't exaggerate black problems. We can't make our problems be our primary identity and pretend that most black people do not wake up thinking about problems and go into sleep thinking about problems. I mean, there might be some individual problems, family problems, career problems, but the average black person is not thinking all day, every day about oppressions, because that's something that we've most of us have been socialized through our families and our black collectives to learn how to create balance. And we can think about that in terms of uh, notions of dueling identity, the veil, the mask that Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote about, that Du Bois wrote about, and also Sam Greenlee's The Spook Who Sat by the Door. And so we just have to understand that as a people, we don't necessarily just constantly think of systemic oppressions and institutional oppressions and all that stuff. Because when you keep preaching that to us, you can't be shocked then when our people are thinking that there's no solution. So I always tell our people, stop doing the revolving door of oppression. We already know problems, right? So let's talk about some solutions, or else you can't be shocked when there's no solutions. We can't blame outsiders for a lack of solutions for our own people. Because if you keep preaching to our people that we have problems, but then when it's time for solution creation, you disappear, then that's the problem for our people. That's not the outsiders doing that. That's us doing that to each other. Okay? So this gets to the next critique of Sowell. Sowell is critiqued a lot of times for not presenting solutions. So when you read his writings, his historical writings, you can read his economics books. He wrote a lot of economics books. He oftentimes would not address the solutions component there. So whenever he's interviewed about that, and you can find interview recordings, he'll just say, you know, solutions are not my role. My role is not to present solutions. My role is to say, here are some concerns, not just for black people, but just we're looking at a global comparison and just overall issues, and other people can fit those solutions. So I understand where Sowell's coming from regarding that. Um, Again, I like to focus on solutions, but I also appreciate people like Sowell who put down information, and it's up to us to pick it up. Harold Cruz was similar in that Harold Cruz built from Du Bois's cooperative economic suggestion, and which was also similar to Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey's extension of Booker T. Washington. And what Harold Cruz did is he presented those concepts and that theoretical foundation that he wanted our people to have for a cultural and political framework. Now, Harold Cruz was honest and said he will not be involved in the actions part, but here's the proposal for solutions that other people have to put into actions. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about Thomas Sowell not presenting solutions. It's actually very common for our people to have a segment who are thinkers, they're writers, they're presenters. And again, Thomas Sowell comes from a background when he was young of being a black radical. And I'm going to be real honest right now. Many black radicals who are part of these black radical organizations, the question for solutions is sometimes very unclear. And that's for various reasons. So I'll just end it there on that one. Okay? All right, the next bullet point
Okay,
here.
okay.
Then I said, Sowell claims that racial integration is a necessity as blacks can no longer have the inner focus as done by migrated ethnic groups. So again, initially Thomas Sowell wrote about the issues of desegregation, and he used Dunbar High School as an example. But then Thomas Sowell eventually said black people can no longer claim that there's a problem with racial integration. We can no longer have this nationalist standpoint of only having our own resources and only being off to ourselves and each other. And Thomas Sowell said that because he says that that perspective is outdated. It worked 50 plus years ago, but now it just isn't working because we've been more and more assimilated into the United States of America as compared to newly migrated populations, particularly of certain European migrant populations, Asians, and he would also perhaps use people from the Caribbean, South America as examples as well. So that's just
You
something
know,
to
let me
consider.
stop you for just a second, Doc.
Uh huh.
And before you move on, one of our code keepers asked a question, and I'm assuming it's a question. If you don't have solutions, then what's the point of talking about problems?
Well, I just said
You-
that. I just explained
Right, right,
something.
right.
Most people who do writings, they will explain the issue and then they're passing it on to the next one to form a solution from that issue. That's how theories are created. That's how research is conducted. So I do solutions work. However, most people do not do that. And I mentioned Harold Cruz as an example. Also,
Right.
people who like think tanks. Think tanks are not based on solutions. They are literally thinking and talking. And just like whenever you hear about a black think tank, just know that they talking a whole lot. It's mostly for social networking, and they'll brag about talking to legislators. But when it comes to real action based, they'll do photo ops with politicians and legislators. Okay, so solutions, you have to actually define it clearly, because some people think solutions is we discussed it. Some people think solutions is they created a theory and they put it into research and now you have to put it in action. I think of solutions as a combination of all of that, and then that's when I provide community resource tables with resources for health, education, economic development. So for me, solutions are
Okay.
something that's visible. However, I'm not too mad at people who don't see it like that, because as long as you provide me the resources, I'll present it in a visible manner for our people.
Okay. Well, I thought that was interesting because you had kind of tapped into that in your discourse earlier.
Yep.
I would answer it very differently. And, my answer is pretty simple. My answer is, one hand washes the other, both hands wash the face. Everybody doesn't do everything.
Yes. Yeah.
So somebody has one part, somebody has the other part, but together you can do the other part, the next
That's
part. So,
that's exactly right, because and
yeah.
that's another critique that Septima Clark had. Septima Clark's critique was that black people, and particularly black youth, have been taught that we can do marches and protests. That was her critique of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that you could do marches, protests, express outrage. However, when it comes to action time, to actually do real change making work beyond marching, because that's not a solutions focus. Like when we talk about actions, we're not talking about get out there in the streets. Like that's not the actions we're talking about. Actions are understanding that we have people who are in these meeting rooms. We have people who are in these boardrooms. We have people who are on board of directors. We have decision makers, people who are actually doing decision making while you're marching in the street. I'm gonna tell y'all,
Well,
they
I, I, I used to believe that. And then I got a chance to read some of the writings that showed the behind the scene work. And I'm going to kind of just give a wide view of it. But the marches they were like commercials. They would bring attention. And then behind the scenes, they did negotiations, they did work. One of the things that happened before Dr. King was assassinated by America was they were working on a Christmas spending boycott.
that's
Now, it wasn't
uh,
his idea, but
yeah,
he just signed on to it. But my point is,
yeah.
behind the scenes, they had some actions that weren't as publicized as the marches.
No, no. Actually, Septima Clark was actually part of these groups, so Septima Clark knew that there were no actions. So having meetings does not mean actions. There's people who do a lot of meetings. I know people who meet a whole lot, and they meet a whole lot. They're part of many different collectives. But when you ask them what they've done beyond the meetings, it's nothing. I'm going to tell you, even back then, a Christmas boycott is minuscule to the lasting impact. People are accustomed to black people claiming to boycott. People are accustomed to black people marching and protesting. There's nothing shocking or
Right, right.
unpredictable about that. Also, I want black people to remember when you talk about a Christmas boycott or any other boycott, if you don't shop there anyway, it's not a boycott. I always have to remind our people of that, because our people have a tendency to what's true. Like people tell me, they're like, Dr.
Yeah.
Kim, you're going to protest and boycott this place. I said, I never shopped there. So I can't boycott it. I never spent money there in the first place. Y'all boo boo the fool for going there in the
Right.
first place. Like y'all wasting money, and then y'all think that not going there for a month is gonna mean something. You know? So that's one of the
Well, I
critiques.
would say with the civil rights organizations and SNCC and some of the other groups. It's a lot more than what we saw on the surface. And
Well,
I'm not demeaning what September Clark said, because she gave some great insight. And I think some of the reasons that some of the actions happened, like when they compelled the president, the sitting president, to give legislation, that was probably in response to some of her critique.
right, because again, making a plan for something does not mean it's actually happening. September Clark and them spent actual time in the communities beyond just giving speeches. It's like, what are you actually doing? Because we're talking about civil rights leaders. You can't be a civil rights leader. We can't have masses of civil rights leaders, mostly black men, and then we don't see y'all anywhere when our people are doing soup kitchens, clothing giveaways, teaching people how to read, and all that stuff. We don't see y'all, but y'all are all over these meetings and doing speeches and doing sermons. So that's the difference in terms of how you're represented versus the actions that have results. Because like I tell people, actions have to have outcomes. If there's no results beyond saying, I did it, and you checked it off the list, that you could have sat down somewhere. We need some real outcomes. What is it going to mean, and how are we going to do follow? How
I
are we going
say
to do
that.
follow through? How are we going to do
I
follow
say
up?
that.
Okay, so that's what it means to have these actions based. So not everyone's going to do those actions. So
Okay.
this is where we say that it's okay to not be the action based person. Say, I'm presenting this, and you all take it to the next level. Treat it like a race. It's a long lasting race, right? We're on the racetrack. You're passing it on, the next person's going on, but you got to make sure you're passing something productive on and not just name dropping. And that's a big issue that a lot of our people have. They want to do photo ops, name drops. They're advancing their careers, paying their bills, but they're not bringing solutions to the next stage on the track field. Okay, that's my rant on that one.
All right.
Okay, so again, Soul said that racial integration is a necessity for blacks because we do not have that development that we can invest only in our people as other migrant populations have, and that's a result, of course, of assimilation over the centuries that changes the focus and the resources needed. So,
All right.
Thomas Sowell also addressed the impact of the negative messages of black culture and negative outcomes. So, Thomas Sowell did do an interview where he talked specifically about rap, negative depictions of rap, and how that impacts the black culture. So that's something that's important to know what it means when Thomas Sowell feels as though how we present our culture will shape our development as a people and, of course, will impact economic development as a people as well. And so Thomas Sowell did use rap as an example of that. William Julius Wilson, if you anyone familiar with Dr. William Julius Wilson, who's a sociologist, and he's still alive. He's a black man. He's still alive. He's in his 80s now. And I also have a shared Google Drive folder for him if people want to contact me regarding that. William Julius Wilson also included the role of rap in black culture and how negative depictions of rap can impact how our culture is presented and the results regarding that. And he looked at specifically poverty, socioeconomic status, and the connections of crime in that. Harold Cruz, however, did not talk about rap. Now it's interesting, Harold Cruz lived until the year 2005, but there's no record of Harold Cruz talking about rap or even hip hop. Instead, Harold Cruz used theater because his foundation is based on black culture and art. Because art is the foundation of our people. Black artists are the intellectuals and scholars of our people. So when Harold Cruz talked about art, artistic expression, and culture, he talked about in terms of the theater, using Harlem as an example, but there's no record that we have where he talks about the role of rap. And again, he was alive in those first years of rap existing. We do have some of our people who are writing Harold Cruz's pieces or doing presentations, and they're using the crisis of the Negro intellectuals done by Harold Cruz, and they're connecting it to hip hop. But that doesn't mean that's what Harold Cruz said. That's an example of what it means when you have a theory and you're applying the theory to other things. So just know they're applying Harold Cruz's perspective and his theory and his publication to hip hop. which is different than if Harold Cruz himself said it. Okay, so in this
Okay.
instance, Thomas Sowell did say something about the depictions of rap. So you can agree, disagree. You know, I'm old school hip hop and old school rap. I'm talking about I like a range of it. So people who are judgmental of it, you're gonna hate a lot of the music from the '80s. Um, you know, Cash Money and made that song.
Woo!
Yeah,
Bling bling.
no, no, I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about that Cash Money. I'm talking about DJ Cash Money from the
Oh,
'80s
you talking
and
about DJ
'90s.
Cash Money?
Yeah,
Okay.
they
All
got
the
they.
ugly people be quiet.
Yeah, he said, find
Yeah.
yourself an ugly woman and make her your wife because pretty girls they have you singing the blues. And if yeah, so they have they're actually doing some new performances now, by the way, so you can find them on social media. I
Shout
mean,
out to
we
Philly. Shout out to
yeah,
Philly.
yeah, and of course, Two Live Crew.
What
But
you
I'm
like,
also,
fellas? I'll leave it at that.
but I'm also range because you know Gold is Rakim, Big Daddy Kane, MC Light, Nikki D, Lennoff Steam. So I want our people to understand something. Even when critiquing our culture, critiquing rap, critiquing movie depictions of us, reality TV depictions, it doesn't mean you get rid of all this stuff. We have to understand it can't just be perfect images. And the perfect images cannot just be one interpretation of our people that you have. It's okay to have a range of depictions of our people. And you can
Okay.
dislike some of them. You can't get rid of it just because you don't like it. So that's very important for our people to understand regarding the assessment of our culture, and rap is an example of that.
Well, would you agree, like Darius Williams is saying, that hip hop is not the problem? The cultural expression is not the problem.
Well, I just explained it. I just said
I just said, would you agree? I mean, you explained it, but it doesn't mean that you agree when you explain things.
I neither agree I neither agree nor disagree. What
That's
I
my point.
Yeah, I don't believe in just agreeing or disagreeing. I believe in explaining it. There's a balance to create, and we have for regarding race, we have centuries of music genres for our people. If you look at the old school juke joint music that I love, those songs were quite disrespectful. Okay? And I appreciated them. They were singing about all, these are women, these are our sisters, singing about all types of things, okay? So if you understand the history of genres of our music, there's a lot of bad stuff. Every generation claims that the previous generation, they always claim the newer generation has messed up our culture. Every generation has negative depictions of our culture. Every generation, okay?
Okay, give us an example.
Of
This
what?
is an aside. This is an aside, but give us an example of some of the old school juke joint music that was disrespectful. We know you like Helter Skelter. You know you think that Rakim is the god. Who is your go to for the disrespectful juke joint music?
Well, I'm talking about like songs that would be considered Jezebel music,
Okay, can you
okay?
name one?
Like Lucille Bogan, if anyone's familiar with Lucille Bogan.
Okay,
Y'all
okay,
quiet.
I see where you're
There's
going. I
Yeah,
see where you're going.
I mean, we're talking about people who were born in the 19th century.
1920, yeah, that early 20s.
Yeah, she was born in 1848. So, yeah, so there's all types of different examples of music that were considered inappropriate back then. Music about shaving themselves in a certain part to prepare for something else about to happen. So again, when you look at depictions of cultures, you can't expect just something that you want to see. You can't expect something that you consider perfect. You have to
Okay.
understand the range of our people and the range of cultural expressions there.
All right. Now your next point is Sowell's critique of black culture depictions is often appreciated by non blacks who criticize black culture.
Yeah, so one of the issues of Thomas Sowell critiquing black culture is that he does get support, particularly from white conservatives and Republicans, because that's based on this notion of pinpointing the problems of black people and saying that the problem is rap music, the problem is this, the problem is these people don't want to read, the problem is they're criminals, that kind of thing. So it is important to know that that's not necessarily Thomas Sowell's intent, but that's the case for everything that we do as a people. Everything that we do, everything we write and release it to the public, anybody can pick it and take what they want from it. So I just don't want our people to take that too literally. So that's another lesson that I want our people to know. You can write something or say something and release it to everybody, just like I'm saying something now every 2 weeks. Some people can hear what I'm saying and they can take it for exactly what it is. Some people can hear what I'm saying and misconstrue it, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
intentionally, and try to, ruin the earth to just to prove a point. So I just want our people to understand you can never deliver a message in a way that pretends that everyone's going to get the message. You just do your part. Thomas Sowell's intent is to say that this is something that can be improved. However, even saying that, and this is something that you can think about when Two Live Crew was banned in the USA and all that stuff. Again, you can get the point of saying how we can improve depictions of our cultures while also understanding that there are non blacks who will agree with you. I mean, we can also look at it in terms of white liberals and white radicals. There are white liberals and white radicals who I've been around over the years in different cities and different states. And when they hear me listening to old hip hop, I'm listening to Helter Skelter, I'm listening to Boot Camp Click, and they don't like certain lyrics. And they want to tell me about my culture, right? They're like, that's a horrible depiction of so and so. And I'm like, well, first of all, being a white liberal or white radical does not give you permission to give me input on my culture and my depiction and what I celebrate. Like I will listen to what I listen to.
Right.
You don't tell me what language, you don't tell me any of that. So that's just an example that it's very typical for non-blacks to think that they have to intervene and give insight on this. But I want you to think about it from a Thomas Sowell standpoint. Now, another thing is that Thomas Sowell does a lot of the interviews and publications for outlets that are conservative and predominantly white. He does that because, unfortunately, most black interviewers and sources for publications are not open to differing viewpoints. And that's very important to understand. Our people have many different viewpoints. But if you go based on a lot of the media outlets and the publications that you read regarding race, you will think that all of our people had a meeting and agreed to only believe one thing. It's true. We
Yeah.
always joke about this, the Black Town Hall meeting, right? Right?
Yeah.
I
Or a
hate the
cookout.
Yeah, I hate it. I hate when people say we're not a monolith. We're not a monolith, but in that sense, we're depicted as such, and sometimes we are to blame for doing that because it's like we want to be seen as a wide span of people with different cultural components, different belief systems, different socio-political views. But when that's presented as such, we then are like shocked that that's been presented as such. So we can't have it both ways. So Thomas Sowell has a difficult time publishing and speaking to black audiences because our people, despite our people, generally speaking, being quite conservative, including religious conservatives, and this is around the world, this is not just the United States of America, our people will deny that conservatism when put on record. But when you talk to our people, and including black elders, you'll hear some viewpoints that are actually quite similar to what Thomas Sowell is conveying there. And a lot of these black elders will explain that they had a different viewpoint when they were younger, but as they've gotten older, they've seen different things, and now they're just tired of certain things.
Understood. Understood.
So
However,
I will,
like you
well, I
said,
will end there. Yeah,
okay,
yeah. Like I said, however, his viewpoints are not as different from other Black people's viewpoints. His viewpoints don't match all of my viewpoints, but that's why I integrate components of his perspectives with my perspective, because that's the theoretical integration for Black solutions. So although I don't agree with everything he said, I don't pretend that what he's saying is not black. And here's an example of that. Sometimes I've heard Black people say Thomas Sowell is not really black. He's a black man, okay? He's a black man in his 90s. He came up in a time where being black radical was very difficult, okay? You could not just say you're a Marxist. You could not just go on TikTok and, walk around talking about black radicalism and all that stuff. So he's a black man. I don't want our people to ever try to negate or erase or downplay people's blackness and his black manhood because his views are different from yours. Because, again, like I said already, if you talk to a lot of our people, including some Pan Africans, some black nationalists, and some African nationalists, you will hear some viewpoints that are shocking to you if you're in an open space where people feel like they can convey the viewpoint to you without being judged and without you closing the door on them. This is why I encourage our people, do not close the door on each other. You can express disagreements, you can express debates. I love debates. Debates are actually very healthy and productive for our people because that's actually how we learn together and we build concepts, theories, research, actions, and involvement together for Black evolution. But it can't just be disagreeing with each other and then everything's a deal breaker with every black person. Because some of the black people with whom you are closest, they have viewpoints that you had no idea because they knew they couldn't tell you that. Okay? So that's just something that I want our people to think about regarding Thomas Sowell. You might read one of his books and disagree completely, and then read something else and agree completely. So that's one thing I tell people. You might disagree with what he said regarding the history of race, but then you'll agree with his economic perspective. You can't,
Ashe.
you gotta see how to integrate it and take parts, and don't be so quick to abandon our people.
Yep. All right. So, class, we just had another great workshop. Think tank. No. Class with Dr. Kimya. And I'm telling you, I hope you took notes. I hope you took notes. We had some great conversation. We learned a lot. And I think this is the best way to go out.
Doing it like this.
All right, y'all. Make sure you check out Dr. Kimya's website. Go to the show notes. You can download the information from the link that we'll place in there. Peace. Now, I got to figure out how to stop this one because this one is crazy. Okay. Leave. How do you stop this one? Here we go. There's a stop button.
It's
Peace. Oh, we have
it's
five.
still recording.